All right, this is Mr. Cloud, and this is the video version of the core content notes for Lesson 6D, the executive branch. We're going to focus specifically on the executive branch today. First of all, the first note, presidential power is broad. So he has lots of different powers in both domestic and foreign affairs. Domestic means inside the country. But there are limits to what the president can and cannot do. Again, we learned about the powers of limited government, but we also learned about the principle of checks and balances. So there are certain things the president cannot do that other branches can do. All right, so first of all, we need to learn how the president influences policymaking, how he influences making the laws for our country. The president can propose legislation or bills in an annual speech he makes to Congress called the State of the Union Address. We'll learn more about that in class. The president can appeal directly to the people and ask them to pressure their representatives to take action. The president can approve or veto legislation such as bills. And the president appoints the government officials who actually carry out the laws, and they are answerable to him. So he's responsible for making sure the laws, once they're passed, are actually done. Second item here, cabinet officials, cabinet departments, agencies, and regulatory groups within the executive branch interpret and execute the laws. So cabinet departments like the Department of Agriculture, agencies like the FBI, and regulatory groups like the people who regulate television, right? And it's called the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. They regulate lots of electronic communication. They're all part of the executive branch, and they take the laws, they interpret them, make sure that they have an agreement about how they're supposed to be executed, and they're in charge of executing them. Congress may pass a law about water quality, but it will probably be the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the executive agency that actually enforces that law. They're the people who make sure that law is taken care of. So the final item we need to talk about here is that the president exercises power in a number of ways, and the SOLs want you to know these ways. You just get familiar with it. This is going to be a list that we'll have to memorize and come back to several times. You don't have to have every word memorized as long as you have the core meaning. The president acts as the chief of state, chief executive, chief legislature, the commander-in-chief, chief diplomat, chief of party, and chief citizen. Let's break that down. Chief of state is when the president acts as the ceremonial head of government, like a king. So if someone comes to our country and is like, who's in charge of your government, we typically say it's the president. The president is the chief person that gets to show up at the Olympics they want to, and is like the chief representative, and the president does a lot of ceremonial things that typically in other countries might be done by a king or emperor or something like that. But of course, our president is neither a king nor an emperor. Our president is the chief executive. In other words, he or she is the head of the executive branch of government. He or she is the ultimate boss of around 2 million federal government workers that work for the executive branch. That's a lot of folks. And of course, he doesn't have time to go around and supervise each one of them individually. It's a big bureaucracy where there's bosses who are in charge of a number of workers, and there's bosses under them, and there's people under them, and this whole kind of pyramid structure, and it all points towards the president, who's the ultimate boss of all those folks. The president is also the chief legislator. He or she is the most visible proposer of new laws. He or she can come out and say, I would like there to be a law about gun control or about the environment, and that gets a lot of traction, a lot more traction than kind of some random member of the House from Wyoming who says that, where only a few people are going to listen to that. Commander-in-Chief, the president also is the head of the nation's armed forces. All members of the armed forces swear their allegiance to follow the directions of the president. That's why it's a big deal. The president is a civilian, so a civilian, a non-military person, is in charge of all the military. Earlier we learned how Congress is the only branch that has the power to declare war. However, What we've had happen since World War II is the president, because he's in charge of the military, will just launch a military strike. Sometimes with the permission of Congress, sometimes not exactly with the permission of Congress, but he's again is in charge of the armed forces, so he has the ability to do that. The president is the chief diplomat. Diplomat means that's the person who works with other countries, who has a relationship with other nations. So he or she is the architect of American foreign policy. That's the wording of the SOL, so I wanted to say that, even though that's a little bit of an unusual way of saying this. That means that he or she is in charge of making sure that our relationships with other nations are good. So he gets to negotiate with other countries and write treaties with other countries and things like that. And sometimes invade other countries. There's a whole range of things the president can do in terms of the relationship. The president is the chief of party, so he or she is the de facto leader of the political party that he or she is a member of while serving as the president. So if he or she is a Democrat, then he also serves, or he or she also serves as the chief Democrat. And finally, the SOLs want you to know that the president serves as the chief citizen. He's the representative of all the American people. All right. Oh, and there is actually one other thing. I'm sorry about that. It's very fast. The SOLs want you to know, and this is absolutely true, presidential power has grown in the years since the Constitution was ratified. The original thought of the executive was that he or she wouldn't have much power at all, and the real power would be with Congress. But what we've seen happen over the last 200 years is that that's actually not the way it's worked out. The president has quite a bit of power and seems to be growing in power each time. Of course, that might be a little frightening to the original founders, who were very concerned about a king or a dictator or one person having too much power. All right, make sure to go over to Kia, take your online learning check, and I'll see you in class.